Welcome back to the 35th episode of the Cream City Club podcast. I am Spencer Michaelis, and I'm here as always with Gunnar Amelunk. Gunnar, how you doing tonight?
Doing good. We're recording on Monday, April Fools, so anything we say today may or may not be true. So don't hold
Yeah.
us to anything.
Yep, can't hold anything against us no matter what we say. If we're wrong, it was a joke. If we're right, we are being deadly serious. And that's how it works really any day that we
True.
record a
Yeah.
podcast. So we can never be wrong. But if you are listening and you haven't yet subscribed, please take a moment to do so on whatever platform you're on. Uh, if you believe we've earned it, rate us 5 stars. Follow us on Twitter at the Cream City Pod to stay up to date on these episode releases. And today is going to be a Bucks focused episode. So we've only been able to do a couple Bucks themed episodes for a while now. So what do we have coming up tonight, Gunner?
Yeah, so the injury bug may have struck, sort of, we think, not really. We're going to explain why that's the case and why there's a little confusion with that. Then we got 3 games to cover since we've last done a Bucks podcast, the Laker game, Pelicans game, and Hawks game. Then we're going to have a little drama discussion. We'll try to spark a little fight between Spencer and I, but Jrue Holiday hopped on the Draymond Green podcast and had some comments about the trade and the aftermath of the trade, sort of his feelings on all what happened in that scenario. So we'll be giving our opinions on that. And then finally, I came up with a little game for Spencer and I to get us ready for the playoffs. Just a way to answer some questions that the Bucks may have going into the playoffs, really. So we're going to call that Fact or Fiction Bucks Playoff Edition. So first, with that injury bug that I talked about, it struck, but that was with Pat Bev. And if you did not see, it was a wrist injury that he had, which went a little bit under what's I can't think of the word, not under the table a little bit, I guess you can say. People don't really, I didn't notice it a lot, but a lot of people didn't notice it, but he did get hurt and he's deciding to play through it. And could have surgery on it. He had a whole podcast about how he's going to play through it. I think he even released a little bit of a hype video in Pat Beverly fashion. And Spencer, how much does Pat Bev mean to this run in the playoffs? How much would we have missed him if we couldn't have him? Because that was definitely a scare at that point.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it plenty on here before, but I think he's super important, at least in like 15 to 20 minutes a game. Having somebody who can come in and actually be point of attack defender is going to be super important in the playoffs. And I also think while he's not the best ball handler or point guard in the world, he is better than all the other options the Bucks have for that type of role. And a guy to just get him into an offense when Dame and Chris and Giannis aren't out there or only one of them's out there. So I was pretty worried when the first initial news was like 3 to 4 months if he gets this surgery. It was like, well, that's the season. Um, of course, he kind of planted that in a way to make it sound like he was going to be out. And then, like you said, in Pat Bev fashion, he said like 10 minutes later on the podcast, but I'm going to play through it. So whatever. It's not that big a deal. I mean, I think to me, it sounds like the injury Chris had a couple years ago. Before he got hurt in the playoffs, he actually was dealing with this wrist injury. And he did end up getting surgery in the offseason, but he was able to play through it at the time. It was his left for Chris. It was his left hand. And this is Pat
Yep.
Bev's shooting hand, his right wrist. So we'll talk about the Hawks game in a little bit, but he clearly is still capable of making shots and scoring because he did have 18 in that one and shot pretty decently from the field. It would have been a pretty big blow, I think. I think they need him to at least be a guard version of what PJ is, and he can do that whether he can make shots or not. But being able to make shots only makes it more likely that he'll actually help us during this run. So it would have been a pretty big blow. I'm happy to see he's playing through it. I hope he's able to continue doing it. You never know if cumulatively it starts adding up the pain and stuff as he plays on it more and more. But so far he seems to be dealing with it fine, and I haven't noticed any obvious changes to the way he's shooting or the way he's dribbling or anything. So hopefully it's more of a pain tolerance thing and it doesn't actually affect his game. But yeah, Gunnar, what do you think about the Bev injury? Were you as worried as I was initially when I got the news? Because I was pretty worried when I first saw the.
Yeah, I was worried, and I think we do need him. And defensively, energy wise, a wrist isn't going to really affect that. So it feels like an injury you can play through in that sense. We don't need his offense, but maybe the only argument that I had a little bit of merit why I didn't necessarily love PJ Tucker at points was because on offense in the playoffs. people would just straight up not even guard him sometimes because they know that he was not even interested in shooting the basketball. Um, and it is hard to play 4 and 5 on offense. We made it work. We won a championship, so maybe that is the formula. We need a guy out there who doesn't shoot, but um, just I with this injury, I because of that, I think we need a guy who can just be willing to shoot the open shot. And you mentioned obviously that's the part where the wrist injury definitely affects it, but we've also seen in these last 3 games, which we'll talk about periodically, um, he was not shy of shooting the basketball in these games. So maybe that question gets answered. So as long as he's a threat out there on the floor, as far as just literally being able to shoot, moving the basketball around, doing things off ball, being involved, really, I think there shouldn't be much of an issue. And then um, the biggest thing with him too, just being on the floor defensively, as I mentioned, is what he's brought differently than what we haven't had was that communication part where we talk so much better. He's got guys moving because he's almost like a coach on the floor sometimes. We don't have that sort of captain on the team, unfortunately, when it comes to just volume and guys voicing their opinions and stuff like that. Maybe you get a guy like Bobby who brings energy, but not the IQ that we need on the floor at times. So he brings a little bit of all that we could definitely use. And we don't need the offense, like I said. So everything that he brings, I think it should still be there and fine. His minutes have been 10 to 20, even at times. He's definitely been out there when we need him to be out there, but um, it's not going to be anything that we have to worry about for a very long time on the floor. So glad he's out there for sure. We need him in that aspect, whatever the aspect is, but I think we do need him to make this run that we need. So the other injury that we got, though, that was confirmed as we sort of recorded this podcast was Damian Lillard now has a groin injury. Don't know the extent of it, don't know how serious it is. Don't know if that's why he was partially out with, I know his personal reasons this last game. Don't think that would be tied to that really at all. I know his son had a birthday and things like that. That's what I was hoping it would be tied to. But yeah, we just don't know the seriousness really of it right now because there hasn't been a lot that's come out of it. So hopefully that's not much. I know that he did come out of that Pelicans game. Um, Spencer told me that I think he had like a lip injury that he had to cover up, and he was out on the bike. So maybe that's just a little bit all tied together. But yeah, hopefully he's fine and ready to go in these next coming games. So um,
Yeah, I mean Dame missing time would be much more
yes, yeah, we need
much
him.
more of a problem. Like I think we need Bev over the course of a playoff run, but I think you need Dame to even advance in the
Yeah,
playoffs right
and
now.
timing
So
wise too, with these two guys getting hurt, definitely not positive. To have little knick-knack injuries here at the end, but also we're pretty secured with a seeding, even if it's 2 or 3. I'm not worried about seeding. Maybe that's like something that will come up later in the show here, but um, just not the best time to have injuries like this, but also enough time to where we can manage these and hopefully get them right by the playoffs. So
yeah,
um,
agreed.
sliding into these games, then I guess first we had that Lakers game all the way back a week ago now. Coming off arguably our best win of the season, Spencer. I know we argued about that a little bit, but a positive argument because it was very well was fortunate, or it was probably our best game of the year against the Thunder. Um, and we come into this one for 3 quarters. It looked like we were doing pretty well. And it looked like, oh yeah, this is a team that we're able to control. Um, Really the stats though in this one that highlighted out to me was Lakers out rebounded us. Um, we had 26 fouls to the Lakers 13 fouls. Now I did see a stat after the game where this is very much a trend with the Los Angeles Lakers, how many fouls they get throughout the year. I'm not saying this could be part of our April Fool's joke maybe, but maybe the league has to look into that a little bit more because it seems pretty obvious why they're getting more calls than other teams are getting calls, especially for a team that's trying to make the playoffs. And just that statement, period. They're trying to make the playoffs. They're fighting for a spot. Um, and yeah, I mean, they're a solid team, but really, the fast break points too in this one, we were way ahead. I'm not sure what it ended up being. Um, but speaking to more of that pace in those first 3 quarters, that's why we were able to get out to that run that we did and that lead that we did because we were playing with that pace and just outplaying them as far as energy goes, really. Bench points, I believe that we're up. At least we had solid production from our bench. And then the bad things start to happen. Our 18-point lead in the fourth quarter starts to dwindle down a little bit. And it was like I want to say like 9 minutes, 8 minutes left with the 18-point lead, you're probably saying now we've always said throughout the year that 20-point leads don't really matter anymore in the NBA. But what I didn't like about this part is I've heard other people talk about this aspect of why do teams at the end of games start to slow the game down when maybe we can maybe sense a sort of like, oh, we're bleeding a little bit. They're coming back. They're making shots. They're outpacing us. Maybe we need to control the ball more and just play slow. And um, I think part of that is trying to get into your sets that you like, and you're trying to just make baskets that you can get to your spots. But what the problem with that was we weren't even doing that. We were just playing slow, even iso ball at times, and not really even getting good shots off, which all of that combined, you're playing exactly into what the Lakers want you to play into. They're playing with pace. They're getting to their shots. They're not thinking about their shots. Just outworking us too. And that's really was the theme for me, especially throughout. We'll go over all of the overtime and everything like that. We were clearly dead at that point. Legs looked tired, especially at the end of that fourth quarter. I want to say we even had a 5-ish point lead. That was when Chris shot the mid ranger, I believe. Maybe it was like a 3-point game when he kind of went ISO and shot that fadeaway mid ranger. And I was like, that's a shot I know Chris can hit. I don't know it's a shot that Chris likes, but it was kind of just like, why did we do that? It didn't make much sense, even the way Chris shot it. I was like, that was just kind of weird. Like we were playing into their hand even more. This is still a game here, guys. We didn't just give this one up. Um, Dame's defense toward the end of this one was, as much as I bragged about Dame's defense, I thought he was also playing to their hand a little bit. He looked tired on that end. Maybe D'Angelo Russell has his number on that side for whatever reason. That seems to be his worst defensive games. But really, all of that combined, um, just I'll let you speak on what you saw throughout. We'll fast forward to that last couple seconds with the last possession that we had offensively. But those all those things combined is really why it got down to a tie game there at the end in the fourth. But Spencer, did you notice anything that I said, or did you have any other guys specifically that you noticed?
No, I mean, you said they kind of went ISO, but I honestly don't remember them running an offense of any sort in the fourth quarter. Like it was literally just dribble the clock out, Dame or Chris take a jumper. And that was pretty much it every time. And honestly, most games you can get away with that when you have as big a lead as they do, as they did, because Chris and Dame will usually make enough of those shots to at least keep the game out of reach. They didn't make shots. Neither of them did. I mean, it was just a bad shooting game for both of them. And the fact that they just kept doing that, never went to at least some sort of ball reversal thing where they were trying to get somebody else involved and then get the ball moving. And it was all ISO. And it kind of sucked because Beasley was having a pretty decent game for most of that game. He kind of got iced out in the fourth in terms of just like moving the ball and getting him an open shot. Then, and we'll talk about the last second offense quick, but then we get to the overtime and then he's shooting every shot. Like he ended up getting almost half of the shots and in the two OTs because he just kept getting open, but he hadn't shot in like a quarter because nobody was giving him the ball at all in the fourth. So it just felt like really, really bad execution for the second time against the Lakers down the stretch, where there was no reason to lose either of those games, and the Bucks just did not execute or even really attempt to execute anything down the stretch. So that those two Lakers losses are probably the two most frustrating losses to me this year because there was no reason for either of them at all. I mean, Giannis put up a ridiculous stat line of 29, 21, and 11, and it got completely overlooked because we lost and we blew a huge lead. He didn't get the ball enough down the stretch, really. He didn't hardly get any touches in the fourth quarter either. It was just still just a bunch of ISO stuff. So it was a weird game. It was a frustrating game. I didn't take too much away from it, but to get to the end of the game, or the end of regulation, I guess. So the first possession, to me, it looked like, I shouldn't say the first possession. The Lakers took a foul with what, 3 seconds left ish, 2.5 or something.
Yeah, right when Giannis drove, which is kind of our last possession, they
Right.
followed him when he went to drive, and then now we got it sideline.
Yeah. So it looked like they ran an action to try and get Dame switched on to somebody else. And he kind of did, but he also saw that Giannis had a really good he had an advantageous matchup on the wing where he thought if I give it to Giannis, he's just going to drive right past Dinwiddie and go score. He was probably right. Unfortunately, the Lakers had a foul to give. So as soon as he drove past Dinwiddie, Dinwiddie just grabbed him. Really smart play on his part to do that. So then we get a timeout, I think, right? They drew up a play. There was a timeout.
Yep.
Okay, so timeout. They draw up a play, and they do the play that honestly works probably 90% of the time they run it, which is Chris throwing a lob to Giannis. The thing that kind of sucked is the amount of time left. They were going to give the ball back to the Lakers, even if they scored there. So that made it a little bit of an interesting decision in that spot. I mean, Chris threw the pass exactly where it needed to be. Anthony Davis definitely got away with grabbing Giannis twice and then giving him a little bump while he was in the air. But Giannis probably still should have finished that through everything. I mean, he got bumped, but he tried to finger roll it instead of like overhand pushing it off the glass, which is much more easy to control if you're up there like that. It was a weird decision on his part, I thought, to try and turn his hand over on that play. But AD definitely got away with multiple fouls on the play. They grab the ball, take a dribble, then call timeout, and somehow they still got to advance the ball. Luckily, they missed the game-winning shot, but I guarantee you that was not supposed to be advanced. He dribbled before they called timeout, which means at that point, you can't advance the ball, but whatever. Austin Reeves got a wide open look because Giannis and Chris miscommunicated on a switch, but he missed the shot barely. So it goes to overtime then. But Gunnar, I know you at the time, the lob play, I don't think you were thrilled with that call. I mean, what did you see at the end there? What did you think about how the end of the last possession went?
Yeah, it was the time on the clock, like you said. A little bit of we're getting everything called against us and we're not getting the call, which that ended up exactly happening with Giannis. Definitely got fouled, so it's hard to even blame him or the play call because the play call was perfect. Chris had a perfect pass. I agree that I told you right away. I think Giannis actually did get on the rim, but he almost spun it so hard off the rim that it just was like a fastball coming off the glass with no touch. Um, I guess it's easy to say like, oh, give the ball to Chris and Dame, but um, sometimes that's what I want to see. You know, at the end of the games, we have two quote unquote closers now, guys who shoot the ball. I totally love when Giannis has the ball too. That's an MVP. I'm totally fine with him. He should have got free throws out of it, like I said, so it should have worked. But um, I think because of the lack of times that we've seen Dame, Chris, and Giannis all together, I was a little disappointed. Not even necessarily with that play in particular, but just that last sort of possession in general of just saying, "Here, Giannis, go do something." Where it's like, well, we could try something fun here and run it with Dame and Chris. Two huge weapons, which no, imagine playing defense against that. You got two guys who can shoot and win you the game, and you also have Giannis off to the side like he was, and he made the right play and got fouled, and then whatever happened after that. But I'm not even sure where Chris actually was on that last play before that one because it was like you mentioned, it was just Dame and Giannis action.
Well, if I think you saw the end of it, but I do think they ran quite a bit to try and get a matchup that they wanted.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
Chris touched the ball, or at least was involved in the action up top. They ran like almost a three-man weave type handoff thing
Hmm.
to try and get a switch. I'm going off the top of my head a week ago now, so I can't remember everyone who was involved. I know Brooks set a screen in there at one point.
Yeah.
I think they were trying to get the center switched on to Dame in the end was their end goal.
Hmm.
Uh, the issue for me still is always that they had that foul to give. So anything going towards the hoop, you were probably just going to get fouled.
Yeah.
So,
Or not.
right. Yeah. But I mean, well, the last one, they didn't have a foul to give and
Yeah.
they did foul. But if you drove, they were going to foul you before you went into your shot. So it felt like a shot for Dame or Chris, somebody who could shoot a jumper,
Right.
would make more sense anyway, just to try and avoid putting yourself in a weird spot. But I mean, in the end, I honestly didn't care too much about how they ran. I was fine with the play calling and honestly with most of the execution. I think Dame made the right read giving it to Giannis when he did too. I just think the Lakers played it well, and then the Lakers got away with a foul. And then once we could stop talking about this part of it, but once we got to overtime, it was like you said earlier, the Bucks were dead. I can't believe they made it to a second overtime because the Bucks looked terrible from the start in OT. Like
Hmm.
Dame hit the big three from the corner on a catch and shoot when he had just gotten blocked. But still nobody was really hitting shots. I mean, Giannis was walking up the court on offense a lot because he was just gassed. Chris and Dame were still not really getting into a quick offense because they were so tired. They were just kind of doing the same thing they did the whole fourth quarter, which was just kind of dribble around. And then in a lot of these cases, like I said earlier, it ended up with a wide open Malik Beasley shot. And unfortunately, he had become kind of cold because he never touched the ball for a huge chunk of the game. So it honestly, you can relate that to what Grayson Allen talked about. That's more what Malik Beasley's role was down the stretch of that game when he had been pretty involved for most of the game, getting open shots and even being involved in the offense in general. He was catching them up at the wing, at the elbow extended, whatever, at the top of the key. He was more involved, and then he just kind of sat in the corner for the fourth quarter and overtime. And like, yes, you'd still like him to make those shots when he's wide open, but you also understand how you can kind of feel like you're cold and you've been frozen out a little bit. So I don't know. I Do you have much more to add on this one? I mean, in the end, the Lakers just made more shots in the second overtime and
Yeah.
than the Bucks did, and they seem to. I will say this: they subbed a lot more in the overtimes, so I think they were more fresh at the end of both of them, and in the fourth, they subbed more than the Bucks. Um, they have a lot of very similarly talented players, and the Bucks kind of have a clear pecking order, so that makes it hard because they can kind of rotate. You know, I'm not a Rui Hachimura fan, but they can throw him in there, and I'd say he's better than a lot of the bench players the Bucks have, and he's fresh and
Hmm.
he's playing at the end of a game while all of the Bucks players have been in the last 10 minutes. Like it is tough in those types of games. That's why it would have been nice to just put him away because you could have put him away and none of that would have mattered at that point. So,
Yeah.
anything else to add on this one?
No, it's just a bad loss, and I don't care about the loss necessarily, but having an 18-point lead in the fourth with under 10 minutes left, I mean, that's a win you were just getting handed and you just got outworked in the end. And I think the last thing I wanted to say, I wasn't confident in this part because again, it was a week ago. I'm pretty sure we made a little run with Jay over Bobby and we went small. And then in one of the overtimes, we went right back to Bobby. It had to be second overtime. And after it was just working, and then wasn't really much of an answer for that. Why was Bobby out there when we were playing well small? And I think that was sort of not people get mad if I say it was a white flag thrown because I put Bobby Portis out there, but it just didn't seem like it made a whole lot of sense because we were playing small. That's a lineup that I actually want to see quite a bit if we can see it, especially with how well Jay Crowder's playing. Um, Having Giannis at the five and Chris healthy and all of that. I mean, that's all your tools perfectly handed to you, especially against a smaller Lakers team with just AD, which Giannis could handle for 5 minutes or less than that. So I think that was sort of a weird thing. But moving forward, I would like to see that smaller lineup if we can see it, because that's definitely a playoff lineup that we could throw out there. Um, Sliding into that Pelicans game though, next, uh, they shot under 40%. We made more threes, so that means that we should have won the game, right? No, we did not win. We recorded our Brewers episode last time, and it was the fourth quarter. We got done right at the end of the first quarter, and we were just hanging up. And I said, "Well, the Bucks are turning the ball over," and that was probably the game script for us because that was pretty much my biggest note was turnovers, turnovers, turnovers. We were 14-6. Might have even held it down a little bit more in the end if you want to say that, but you were just behind the eight ball so much going into this game. Could never really crack into what they had going. Now, I will say, lack of free throws again. They had a ton of free throws. They had 27. We only had 10. Um, Not working into our game plan whatsoever if you're just trying to grind one out, sort of to speak. Which is kind of the vibe of this one I kind of had felt. I want to, well, we did make more threes, but it just felt like more of a grind out sort of game. And also noticing this one with even a Dame injury included, while we're making our quote unquote run, we were running out of 8-man rotation for most of this one. Did not see AJ until I think the end of the game. We did start to see him a little bit, I want to say off the top of my head, but way too late at that point. Um, Really no reason to go with a short rotation at all in that aspect, especially when you're not even close to winning the game or anything. Let's just get some more bodies out there who can help us in this game. My biggest note, which I don't care if people get mad again, Bobby Portis was horrible in this game. 15 minutes, 5 fouls, so bad that Doc even called him out for being really bad in this one and said he needs to be better. Um, a lot of his post ups were okay. He didn't even shoot that much, I don't even think, but um, some of that getting trapped, and I kind of triggered my memory of Spencer here. I was texting you and uh, there's new podcast with JJ Redick and LeBron, and they're talking about post ups and how you don't really see that much in the game anymore because it's a lot on you, a lot of reads. How can guys trapping you? So you have to be pretty smart when you post up, and that is not what Bobby Portis is at times. And it gets pretty stagnant the offense. And if he's not going well on defense, he was just bailing them out pretty much, just ticky tacky fouls. Just a combined not at all what I want to see out of Bobby Portis when he's going well. So, um, Pat Bev though was shooting like crazy in this first half. I think he was like 0 for 4 or 5 shooting, and that was probably one of our first signs of him like, oh, his hands doing okay. I guess he's shooting it. Um, I guess the only other player note I had too was Giannis scored 20 straight points for us to even make this one manageable at all. We had no offense going, and he was just willing us um, to get us even close in this one. And he didn't even have a perfect game before that, but that was definitely his catapult to have a decent game there. So I think eventually we got to within like 5 on a game 3 at the end. That was maybe the most life we had in the entire game, where we felt like, ooh, maybe we can actually win this one. And then coming out of that timeout, it was just blood, nothing. They had a huge run, a lot of deferring to Malik again, which um, I think he had a bad game in this one overall. Oh no, he had a
Yeah,
good game over. It was
he
good,
was 6
yeah.
of 11
This was
from
the
three.
opposite one, yeah. So
Yeah.
this was the opposite one again. So yeah, I mean, people. I saw a lot of people deferring to Malik and stuff like that when it comes to Dame. I get it. I think even these two games combined is sort of the theme. I think Dame's just making the right plays at times. He's going to have to find that balance of it sounds cliche, but it's Dame time sometimes. Don't be afraid to take over the game because he hit that big shot to get us within 5. Don't be afraid to take the game over if you want. But yeah, really all my notes for that one. Another depressing game, which coming off of 2 games, though, again, our best game of the year, and then you have 2 games where it looks like you're just lacking in really every part of fight that you need to win a game.
Yeah. No, I don't have much to add. Along the lines of the bench, it was more of a 9-man rotation because it was Bev, Bobby, Crowder, and Pat Connaughton. But Bev didn't really play in the second half at all. And then AJ Green, like you said, came in. He played a minute 50 of game time. He was 0 for 1 on a corner three. He did like a catch high, keep high, which was a little weird to see. But the Bucks were +4 in his 2 minutes. He is still, to me, the guy who, one, is one of our better defenders. I genuinely think he's one of the better wing slash guard defenders on the roster. So he's not hurting you on that end when he's in. And two, teams don't want to leave him. Teams are afraid to leave him. They know he's a shooter. They're screaming shooter, shooter whenever he's on the court. I think Pat Bev even talked about that on his podcast. He said something like teams are, when he comes in, they're like shooter, shooter. Like immediately they're saying, we got to make sure we're on top of him. Yet he's playing 2 minutes in a game and the team does well when he's on the court and then he doesn't go back in at any point. And it's so, it was one of my big concerns with Doc is that he wouldn't play the young guys. And I don't think Marjan earned minutes, and I'm not even totally sure Ajax earned a bunch of minutes or anything this year, but AJ absolutely has. He has. Every time he's been in, he's never a negative. Even if he's not making shots, he's fine. Like he does enough to keep teams honest. And that's not the case with a lot of our bench players. A lot of our bench guys have to be making shots or they're not going to be helping. And it's just very weird to me that his playing time is so sporadic and like it almost feels like Doc is like, did he make his first shot? Okay, yeah, we'll play him for another. Now he'll get 15
In the
minutes.
second half of the game, which you can
Yeah,
get into the psyche of players a little bit if you want, but imagine sitting in a game cold all game, and then you come in the second half and say, okay, do something. You
yep,
miss one shot, and now you're sitting for the rest of the game. It's
yeah,
like, what was I supposed to do? I played solidly overall, but just not a way to really instill confidence, I don't think, in a guy that
no,
could help us for sure.
right. But yeah, I mean that was my only other. You hit on everything else I was going to talk about for that one. So I guess we can move on to the last one and the most recent, and probably the game I most expected to lose out of that stretch. Maybe the Pelicans are a good team. I should note the Pelicans are a good
Yeah,
team.
they're really
And
hot right now.
yeah, and Zion is really figured things out. He's playing well. They did not have Brandon Ingram, which that kind of made a difference. I feel like in a way that the
Hmm.
Bucks probably should win a game in that regard. And we didn't even mention the Lakers didn't have LeBron again, but it's this game. Dame was out with personal reasons, so I kind of honestly went into it thinking, well, this might be a 3 in a row stretch here. But I mentioned it earlier. Pat Bev with 18 points, 6 of 10, 2 of 5 from three. Like they needed that without Dame on the court. They
Hmm.
needed some scoring from the guard spot because Beasley had another bad shooting game. Um, Brook hardly shot the ball at all, but he made all 3 of his shots, including a three, and he was 6 for 6 from the line. He played really well on defense again, of course. Giannis with 36, 16, and 8 casually. Uh, and Chris had 21, 6, and 6. So the starters all had a really, I mean, every starter except Beasley played really well, did their role, did everything you would want them to do. The bench, again, was a little weird. I mean, AJ did play 12 minutes this game and didn't really do much. He was 1 for 3, 0 for 2 from three. We didn't shoot. I think we were under 30% from three as a team in this. Yeah, 28.6%. So the shooting wasn't really there. So to win a game without that, the bench did not make a three, actually. Now that I'm looking at it, Bobby was 0 for 2. Jay was 0 for 3, Pat was 0 for 2, and Green was 0 for 2. So the starters did the heavy lifting in that regard. Chris was 3 for 3. He was 9 for 10 overall. I mean, he had a really good game. I only caught parts of this game live, so I don't have too much to break down in terms of the actual gameplay. But from what I did see, um, well, we should also mention who the Hawks were missing in this one, which is Trae Young. No Trae Young. So we keep catching teams without some of their best players, but it's Bev definitely had a really good game in every regard. Like it was nice to see him play. You didn't really know after the first 2 games of the wrist thing if he was actually going to be able to play through this well. And this was at least a good sign that he's capable of doing things even with it going on. Um, for me, it really just all came down to everybody doing what they do. And Giannis making 12 of 16 free throws was really big because that has been a struggle since he came back. 75% from Giannis, I will take that. I'll take 70%. It's those games when he's 6 of 13 that then they start hurt. Then it starts hurting you. Even though he's playing really well, teams will start putting him on the line, and he hasn't looked great since he came back. So it was good to see him have a good game. Hopefully that carries over. But Gunnar, did you have any real big takeaways from this one?
No, it was the lack of threes making, but also just the lack of threes in general. We only shot 28, like you're mentioning, with the bench not shooting many. Free throws I flagged too, as we were able to get our game going with free throws, especially just with Giannis, but the attempts too were there again. Turnover battle, which is probably something I'm going to be highlighting a lot now. We won that finally. Speaking of Chris's big game, he literally missed one shot in this one. Giannis big game. Bobby did have some offense in this one. It was just a solid Bobby game, I guess you could say. We needed his offense too without Dame. And then towards the end of this one, I mean, I want to say we had a 20-point lead in that fourth quarter ish again. Getting flashback heat flashes to Lakers games, getting the meat sweats. But no, we were able to kind of calm it down a little bit again. Sort of speaks to Giannis and Chris games in general. I think they bring a little bit of calmness to the end of these games where we know what to go to, we know what to do. And that was just really the story there in the end is they just did not let them get back in the game and were able to hold on and win. So yeah, so that was really just the 3 games in general. We don't have much more to add on those. We can go into more of our juicier topic though with the Jrue Holiday Draymond Green podcast. Juicy, not juicy. That's probably where me and Spencer are gonna agree and disagree here with some of his comments. But yeah, he hopped on his podcast and there was a ton of different topics. This wasn't really the only one that he talked about. Talked a lot about his Celtics season too and everything that they got going on with their season. But what's caught a lot of headlines with Bucks fans was the comments that he made about the trade. He's made comments before. He's talked about it. We kind of already know what he feels like in this topic, really. But Draymond asked him what was the breakdown of everything that happened with the trade in general and how shocked he was, and he was shocked. He talked about what led up to that, and he had a good offseason. He was talking about with Grayson, they had a good offseason. Ironically, they were both running the gym that day. No telltale signs of them getting traded, which was his point. And all of a sudden, he gets a call. He was taking a nap. Didn't answer the call from the GM, wakes up, gets the call, and finds out he was traded. So his direct quote, really talking about all of that, was, "I had no clue. It was just a shock because at least let me know 24 hours in advance, not 5 minutes advance. I won a championship there." So really, I guess I could start it out, Spencer. I'll try to say some triggering words so you can. The good news is we've calmed down a little bit, even if this was a slight argument between us since it's a week ago now. But I guess with the comments that he made, were any of them hurtful to us? Were any of them mean? No, they weren't. A guy got traded. He meant a lot to our franchise. Speaking into or kind of getting into his shoes a little bit too as a player. I would feel slightly backstabbed. I totally would, especially if I want to be there. I want to be with my friends. We won a championship. I totally understand not feeling great about getting traded, especially that early, right before a season starts, which there's reasons why that happened and why it dragged out that long. This was a very rare case, but um, I don't really have necessarily a huge problem with that aspect of it. I guess with the part that I don't love, I feel like sometimes that's to me the generic stance to take with this is like we won a championship 3 years ago. That's fine. I will forever thank him. He has the greatest play in Bucks history ever to probably ever, no matter what happens the rest of the way, it's probably going to be the best play in Bucks history he owns. Knocked away and stolen by Holiday is literally words that people will never forget. Um, that's awesome. It's also NBA's the league now of what have you done for me lately sort of thing, which fair or unfair is probably a whole another different discussion. But when you're under that circumstance, plus having a guy like Giannis Antetokounmpo on your team, the clock's always ticking. Every single second, the clock is ticking. And the last two playoffs, he didn't perform. 2022, he had some of the best defensive plays again, and he had amazing defense, but shooting wise, didn't perform well. Um, Going into the last playoffs, he was under a huge microscope. It felt like, at least offensively, because it was starting to get noticed. Because he didn't have a great run even in that finals run, but he was doing so many amazing things, hitting big shots that it didn't matter. We won. Who cares? What? No one cares what your stats are at that point. But then 2022 didn't shoot well. Going into last year, you're like, okay, he's shooting at that point maybe a little bit better than Bledsoe numbers in the playoffs. But it was starting to get noticed. And by the end of that series, did not give us anything offensively. Shot worse than Eric Bledsoe by the end of it. I thought that was a big stat that hit Twitter too. Is a lot better player than Eric Bledsoe. I get it, but a lot of his offense was horrible in the playoffs. And I was a big Bledsoe fan. A whole different discussion there. But I guess with Jrue, it just feels like a little bit of a lack of accountability when it comes to why you got traded. Um, does he owe us that answer? I guess now that I thought about it a week later, no, he's on our rivals. He's not going to be nice to us and say, I was so bad for them and we lost in the most embarrassing way possible on the biggest stage as a 1 seed against the 8 seed. I didn't do well. That's why I got traded. Now we got Damian Lillard. So is even if he performs well and we're in the Eastern Conference Finals and we lose, let's just think about it if we're like the Celtics and we lost that fashion. And Damian Lillard saying, I want to come to Milwaukee and play at the Bucks. Do we not trade Jrue Holiday to get Damian Lillard? I don't know. I don't know what the answer is there. Probably not, but I could also see a world where we still want to get Damian Lillard. So um, he was also pretty open in that aspect too of saying they got Damian Lillard and the pairing of him and Giannis makes so much sense that I understand it. But I just feel like a little bit if is it of I don't like when it turns to a them bashing the Bucks organization in any fashion whatsoever because as he admitted, yeah, you got Damian Lillard. Yes, that's why you got traded, unfortunately, but you also got traded because you didn't perform and the team didn't perform now for 2 years and we're going backwards in steps. So that has to be someone on you. And yeah, I mean, I think it's just a lack of accountability. And I guess the one other thing I had too that maybe still is sitting with me, not badly, but I think he mentioned him and Giannis are really good friends, and that's very obvious. Their kids hang out; they're gonna be friends forever. It's like there's no doubt about that. But I also feel like he knows somebody had to know that Damian Lillard was coming here or had some sort of interest in coming here. Maybe we were third on the list, but he had some sort of intel that he was going to come here, not that day, 5 minutes before the trade broke. Somebody knew. And maybe the guy who knew was the best player on this team and the best player ever to play in the Bucks is Giannis. It felt like with some of his comments, I don't have those direct quotes, but maybe just the vibe, and I could be reading into that. It felt like he was almost alluding to that Giannis might have known or somebody else might have known. He'll never know who knew, but he felt like he was almost owed that. And maybe that was more of his part of it was like, hey, let me know in 24 hours in advance because people clearly know that I'm getting traded. Just let me know. But the other side of the coin is what happens if you don't get traded? That's not going to sit well with you. And now we just tried to trade our guy that we won a championship with that we love as a person and everything else. Um, it's going to be a very sour entrance into the season this year. If we tried to trade you, it didn't work out, and now we're ready to go. Who knows? Maybe that works out. But yeah, I mean, that's really all my thoughts on it now a week later. But I threw a lot at you, Spencer, but anything to yell at me about in those comments?
I already forgot some of the things you said, but for I mean, I 100% agree with you that the 24-hour in advance thing is a ridiculous thing to expect for the reason you said at the end there. They can't tell. You can say as a player, like, I get it, like you're trying to get Dame, I understand, but if it doesn't work out, I'll be happy to stay here. Now, you can say that and that's like a rainbows and unicorns world, but if that actually happens, there's no way there's not at least part of you that's like, really? Like you wanted to trade me, now it didn't happen, and now I'm just your guy again, like you love me now? Like there's no way. There's no way you would think that way. I even go back to the Dante thing with the Bogdanovich trade that didn't go through because he was part of that trade. Like that had to have been a weird feeling for him and DJ Wilson and all those guys who the whole report was like they're going to the Kings, and then nope, they're not. They're Bucks again. Like that had to be eventually Dante did go to the Kings, but that's a different story. But it it had to be a weird feeling, and they handled it well. And I'm sure Jrue would have said all the right things if it happened, but it still would have been weird. And a GM can't do that. And the other reason he can't do that is Jrue Holiday might say something to someone else, and now word gets out that the Bucks are about to get Dame Lillard. The Bucks don't want that to happen. Now other teams are like, oh, we got to up our offer if we want to get him, or we want to keep him away from the Bucks, or like that. This whole thing had to be done very quietly, and Horst played it perfectly in order to get it done. And Jrue expecting that, I think to me, and I will say, he even said, I don't know if that's asking too much. And Draymond even said, like, yeah, it might be. like even Draymond who's very pro player and clearly isn't always looking at things through a team scope. Even he was like, yeah, but pretty much what I said, like a GM doesn't want that getting out. So like he might trust you, but he still can't tell you and have everything in case it goes wrong or in case it screws up the negotiations. Like he just can't do it. Where I think we disagree is that I just none of what he said to me was even somewhat like pointed in a way that like bothered me at all. Like I just did not care about it. Like I watched the whole thing and I came out of it and I was like, oh, he really didn't say anything like at all to me. Like it was nothing new. It was kind of stuff that had already been reported. Nothing he said was like surprising to me. And then all of a sudden I saw a bunch of Bucks. Like it wasn't just you. I'm not even pointing this. I was surprised by the reaction in general from Bucks fans to some of the quotes. Like, and I don't even want to say it in a weird, but like I don't like drama. I don't care about drama very much. And I think a lot of people do. And like, so to me, I don't view things through that lens. Like to me, this was nothing. And to a lot of people, they were looking at it as him. They were taking what he said, not out of context, I don't want to say, but almost like finding their own ending to what he's saying versus just taking what he said at face value. And that's usually how I try to take quotes is like face value. This is what he said. And I will say part of what he was doing was recollecting what he felt in the moment. He was talking about how he reacted to learning this. And to me, that's different than saying now, this is how I feel now. It was more like when I got the news, this is how I felt. And that's what he was telling. Draymond asked him, like, what was your reaction as it was happening? And Jrue's very straightforward with his answers too, which is he always was. He was when he was here with everything he said. It's always he's blunt, he's straightforward. He doesn't really beat around the bush. So I think if he wanted to say something that was outwardly negative at all about the Bucks, he would have just said it. Like I don't think he would have had a problem doing it. And I thought, like, I think if he was on the Blazers right now, it might have been a little bit more like, yeah, like I love the Bucks organization. Like I didn't love how it ended, but I love all the guys over. I love all that. But he's on the Celtics. He's on probably the team that is most likely to compete with us in the East for a finals run this year. He's not going to wax poetic about the Bucks. He's just not going to. I thought for the most part, he was pretty nice. He was like, I love all those guys. Like, Chris is my guy. I talked to Giannis. I told Dame he's going to love it here. Like, he talked to Dame and told him he's going to love it. Like, I think he was hurt, but I also think he understood by the end of what all transpired. Like you said, he said, I understood. Like, I thought Dame and Giannis were a great pairing. Like, it made sense for them. Like, the pick and roll with those two is just ridiculous. I think his initial reaction probably was more in terms of like, what, really? Like we won a championship. Like I just made the all-star team again for you guys. Like I'm all defense every year I've been here. Like why why am I getting traded? And I think now that he's looking at it more now, wide lens, he gets it more and he's more understanding about it. But again, I just don't expect him to go out and be like, yeah, the Bucks made a great choice trading me. Yeah, I sucked in the playoffs. I probably will this year. I don't know. Like, I don't know what we're expecting him to do in that situation. Like, even just most athletes internally will know that they had a rough playoff run or a rough thing, and they might talk about it in the offseason even, but in the middle of another playoff run, do you really want, as a player yourself, do you want to be talking about how you sucked in the playoffs last year? Like, I feel like that's just a way to bring you into a bad headspace. If you're going to be like, yeah, I was bad in the playoffs 2 years in a row, but I'm excited for this playoff run, like that's going to be a hard place to get yourself out of. So, and you said this in text, and you're right. I've always viewed Jrue with like more rose-colored glasses than other players. I absolutely have. I love Jrue. Like Jrue Holiday is one of my favorite players in the NBA, and he still is. I hope he sucks if we play him in the playoffs, but I love Jrue Holiday. I think he's a great person. I think, like you said, he had one of the biggest moments in Bucks history. Even during that playoff run, the stats weren't good, but he had a lot of big shots. Even the Nets game when he went like 4 for 18 in game 7, all four of those shots came in huge spots in the fourth quarter and stuff. Like he made the huge steal in the Celtics series that put us in a great position to win that series and the block.
That was probably one of the honestly, that might be one outside of finals games. That might be one of my favorite Bucks games ever. Period. We just didn't end
Yeah.
that series well, but Game 5 against the Celtics second round
Oh,
is like ingrained in my head. One of the most fun games ever.
yeah. So like I don't think we fully disagreed on stuff. I just again, I think I view things more through like I try to be in their shoes and I don't look for drama and I think a lot of people do and that I disagree with a lot of people on a lot of things about stuff like this, especially people going on interviews and podcasts and stuff because to me stuff gets taken out of context a lot or like I said or it just gets made into something more than it is. Maybe not taken out of context, but it's made into something more than it actually is. And I know Jrue well enough in terms of the type of person he is and the time he was here. Like, I don't think he takes hidden shots at people. I think he's pretty open. Like anything he wants to say, he pretty much says it. And I do think the one thing he beat around the bush on is the Giannis thing and knowing about it. And I think he suspects that Giannis knew at least something about it. But I also think he likes Giannis still. He's like you said, I think they're going to be friends forever. So he wasn't going to go out and accuse him of that. I think in his head he was just I think he thought about it. I think for a split second he was like, I don't know if Giannis knew about it or not, but he was just like, I don't know if anybody knew about it. He's like, from what I know, nobody knew about it. So like I think for sure, I think he does absolutely think that Giannis was aware of what was going on, but he also has no way to fully prove it. And I don't think he wants to mess up a friendship that he has with him by accusing him of that without knowing. And perhaps one day Giannis will tell him, like, yeah, I did. Maybe they'll have a Magic and a Isaiah Thomas sit down and they'll hug about it and it'll be a big TV feature and I will watch it and everyone will be super excited about it, except everyone except me. I mean, but no, you can retort anything I just said. That's fine, but that's my feelings on all of it.
Yeah, no, not so much retort. I think it's just for Drew's to that last thing you said, he probably instantly went back to that All-Star game and remembered, wait, Damian Lillard got picked over me, and we talked about this, how that was fine with me. But was this whole time when I was just getting set up? But no, probably not. I probably nothing, obviously nothing to do with it at that point. Dame didn't even ask out for a trade at that point. He was not going to get traded. But still funny to look back on. The only other thing I just remembered too of that podcast was Draymond needs to be arrested for saying Grayson was our second best perimeter defender and having this whole narrative how Grayson was so important and we had to hear it all off season and we can never replace him and he's just amazing. I love Grayson Allen. I thought he was awesome in his role. One of actually probably I was probably one of Grayson's more bigger fans. I think people actually ripped on him quite a bit when he was here. And I loved what he did. It's just Jrue didn't really retort anything that he said either when he was talking about that, but it's like, okay, Jrue, like he talked about how he had like the best, he was having one of the better off seasons. And it probably was because he's having a great year this year too. So I wouldn't doubt that whatsoever. It's just not going to be stuff that's going to stop me from getting Damian Lillard if Grayson Allen was cooking up the open gyms. But yeah, I just think all of this will not be that deep years from now, like you mentioned with the Magic Johnson, Isaiah Thomas thing. Like I do think something like that. It's not going to happen to that point, but they're going to reunite at some point. We're all going to be celebrating outside of the arena, talking about the finals run. And this will mean nothing at that point. People will forget all about this as long as the Celtics don't have this huge rivalry over us and they're just killing us all the time, or he's being mean to us further than whatever this was. It's going to be a fine relationship in the end. I just think the part that I, I already mentioned this, but I just think that we did this to protect Jrue Holiday, to protect Giannis, and to protect Chris. We did this so that one, that's how the trade had to work to even get this done, but also to protect their friendships and to protect their relationships so that you don't start thinking about this. He can't pin this on Giannis because there's no way you can. Giannis was not really that much involved if he even was involved. I don't even know if he was. I don't know. For sure, I don't. Maybe he knew a little bit inkling, but not enough to where he was the one pushing the red button and saying, I want Damian Lillard over Jrue Holiday. He never probably said that once. Probably what he always does and says, yeah, I would like to play with Damian Lillard. I'm not going to tell you who to trade or how to get him, but I would like to have him on my team. I just think that sucks because I don't want that to be pushed in our organization when we did all of this to protect you and to get a good player to try to get our team better. And we also put you in a decent position too, which it's in the Blazers' hands. He talked about the Blazers did him a favor too. That's fine. But I just think we navigated it as good as you can navigate this. There really is not a better way to navigate this. So yeah, that's pretty much it. And I expect Jrue to do really well too. I think it's a lot different. Maybe he will make shots now because he's the fifth option instead of the second or third with the ball in his hands. If he's just the one you drive and kick to, sort of in a Grayson Allen type role, maybe he's going to thrive in that role versus what he was with us. So, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't expect or be shocked if he was drilling shots against us in the Eastern Conference Finals too. All of a sudden, just for our luck too, he probably will regardless. So, that's pretty much all I got.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I think we're more on the same. If you guys could see our texts, it was a lot more heated than it was
It's a lot
right
nicer
now.
when it's a week later and we can just reflect and think about it. But sliding into our last thing here, at least of the main topics, was my little fact or fiction Bucks playoff edition game we've got here. Just gonna rifle off some topics here. We're gonna just go through and say if it's fact or fiction. It might be as simple as that. It might add some more context to what we're saying, but depends on the topic. So the first one I got here is we've got 9 games remaining with a couple back-to-backs left. Damian Lillard likely being out tomorrow with the groin strain that we talked about. It appears our big three only has about, if they all play in those circumstances, 6 games together. So, fact or fiction, Spencer, the big three have had enough time to build chemistry going into the playoffs.
Fact, but I think they're going to be. I would love to have more. I would have loved to have had more, but I do think they've had enough. When they've been on the court together, it's been one of the best three-man lineups in all of it. I think it's been the best three-man lineup in basketball, at least for whatever the certain amount of minutes played is. But I'm not too worried about those three working together. They've been pretty good already. It'd be nice if we had more, like I said, and hopefully Dame's groin strain isn't more than just tomorrow. You would hate for it to be something where it leads up almost to the playoffs and then they haven't played with each other for a while. Then it starts getting a little iffy in terms of like having to get used to it. I mean, have to get used to it again. But I do think in general they've had enough time. So what do you think, Gunnar?
Yeah, I'd say fact, and it's just going to come down to health. I know there's a much like what you said, there was a fact that Marcus Johnson talked about in his new podcast where when those three guys play, they have like the best plus minus, even better than the Celtics have, and the team, and they have a astronomical one right now. So it has looked clunky at times, especially if you have your glasses on from the last game here. With the Lakers, I think was one of the last, well, the Pelicans, I guess too, but really those last 2 games when they're all together, it doesn't look good offensively sometimes, but I do wonder if there's a little bit of it's not good to have that clunkiness, but it's also good in the sense that you're working it out right now, and we've seen it work really, really well, and now we've seen games where they've had to grind it out at the end of games, and maybe it hasn't worked, but doing things that I think will be beneficial in the playoffs, and we've seen them work together. So it's not even so much between those three guys. It's going to be the guys around them getting comfortable playing with those three guys and how they're in the right spots and working off of them, whether that's Jay, Bobby, whoever, Malik, could be any of those guys. But I think it's just going to be the group in general. But when they have played, they played well. So you got to go off of that. Second one here, fact or fiction, Dame, Chris, and Giannis can all individually close games at the end of playoff games with the ball in their hands. There's no specific closer. This one kind of alludes to that Lakers game. And just in general, you got three stars. Yeah, we'll call Chris Middleton a star. Why not? Three stars who, in every aspect, at some point in their career, have had the ball in their hands at the end of games. Um, are you fine with all of them? At any point, any of those guys can all man the offense at the end of the game with the ball in their hands.
Yeah, I'd say fact on that, but I do think that there's still a general pecking order in that regard. Like, I would rather start with Dame trying to close a game, and if he's not getting shots that he likes, or he's not able to get, or he's not hitting shots, whatever, like, then maybe it's Chris then to try and get some shots. In general, I'd like those two to be handling it and Giannis setting screens and going off of that, and then you can put the ball in Giannis's hands on the run, going towards the hoop. But I don't love the idea of him like necessarily handling the ball outside too often. Really, I'd be trying to run two or three man game with those three in general. Like Giannis can handle the ball. He's been really good as a pick and roll ball handler. So maybe those two set a screen and pop or fall into a short roll where Chris is hitting the mid range and Dame is popping to the 3 point line, something like that, where all three are involved and they're all getting shots that you like. Um, but if it comes down to like final shot and one of them's going to get like, I want the ball in Dame's hands for that. And he might make the right read and it might end up with a Chris shot or a Giannis shot. But I want it in his hands to make the read in that spot because he is the best of the three at that, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. I think in the past I would have said fiction and having Chris be the one with the ball, which is usually something that I don't talk about and I don't want to happen. But we saw in the finals run him and Giannis working really well together. As you mentioned, Giannis is a screener. Chris proved himself as the ball handler in that sense. And now we have Damian Lillard, who's and even better than that. Now we have two guys who could be better than Giannis, and that maybe I would say fiction even then still. But as you mentioned too with Giannis, I think this year he's even stepped up his game as a ball handler. Really getting out the 3 point shooters a lot better than what he has out of the pick and roll. I heard some other stat too. It might even been from that Sam Marcus podcast where he talked about he's got like the most assists in his career out of a pick and roll than he's normally ever had. So his passing decisions have gotten a lot better. What's going to happen though is when he decides to drive and kick, what's always been his problem is if he runs into a wall, what happens then and how the decisions happen then. But I think he's proved himself this year to have that be a fact where all three of them you can live with in a playoff game. If say Giannis does that and we lose because he made a bad decision, I can live with that because he's proved himself this year. And we got Dame and Chris are great shooters too. So even in that aspect, if he's got the ball in his hands, that's two other guys he can kick it out to. So yeah. Third one, factor fiction. Malik Beasley will be a positive and useful playoff rotation player.
Uh, Unfortunately, my brain is telling me fiction. My heart says fact, but my brain says fiction. I don't think he's a good defender, no matter what people try and tell me. I think he's competing a lot harder on defense this year and everything, but I don't think he's a good defender. The shooting has, for him, been a problem in the playoffs for his career. He has not shot well in the playoffs. He's not shooting very well down the stretch of this season. You hope he gets hot like he did for most of the first half of the season, and if he's that type of shooter, then maybe he is positive. But I don't see it. I would guess more likely it's fiction.
Yeah, I'd say fiction for sure. I think people will point to how our plus minus probably is really good with him in the starting rotation still, or starting lineup. I'm thinking of baseball. And how it works really well with the group. I just don't think that translates to playoff basketball. I think that's a whole different animal. You need guys to defend. I think he's been better than normal or what he normally can do, but this is also a guy who's never been tested in that sense in the playoffs. He got benched in the Lakers run last year. I don't think he had any other big moment before that. I can't even think of one. There's no way he was in rotation before that. I think he could be in a I wouldn't be shocked if he's like in a Bryn Forbes type of situation where he does catch a heater one of the first rounds or something, and we really needed that. He was the reason why we won because he made so many shots. But when it comes down to end of games, maybe later in the rounds when we really just need to grind out wins, I don't it plays and how good our small line's play and everything else like that. But I just have a hard time believing our championship lineup's going to involve Malik Beasley, but if it does, and that's the reason, I guess it would be because he made a lot of shots and he was just being a nice solid defender, a nice zero out there, as I always sort of say. So fourth, this one has been a hot topic on Twitter throughout the years. I've seen this a lot, and really since we've gotten Dame, I've seen this a lot because he seems to always be in his way, quote unquote. Um, so I think it's time we finally debunk this a little bit, but I think there's some truth to it. Fact or fiction, Brook Lopez will be best utilized in the paint on offense rather than on the perimeter.
I'd say fact-ish. Uh, to me, his best playoff performances all came when players were driving baseline for the Bucks and he was cutting into the middle of the lane and finishing. Like he was putting up little floaters, he was dunking. I remember a few games against the Hawks where, I mean, he had a huge game against the Hawks where he did it probably 7 or 8 times. He did it in game 6 on a huge dunk. I remember in the finals. That to me is like big men lose track of him when he's moving in that way. I would still love for him to post up guards on switches more often. I think he's fantastic when he does that. I'd love for him to be more aggressive doing that when he gets switches. But I do think there's still plenty of positive to him being on the perimeter and pulling a defender out to him. Teams don't just let him shoot. It's not like he's shooting well this year. He's having a good 3-point shooting year, and he's capable of being a guy who can make 4 or 5 threes in a game. Like, I think he still needs to be out there, but he's got to take better advantage of the matchups when they present themselves to get down low or take better advantage of drives and cutting off of them. And like, no, he's not a fast dude. He's not a quick dude, but he is, for his size, he can still move pretty decently. His size and his age, he moves better than most people that size and that age in the league. And when he catches the ball on the move towards the hoop, it's pretty hard to stop him. And he has really, really good touch too. So he'll finish even in certain weird scenarios and he can get fouled and he's an 80% free throw shooter. Like there's plenty of good that can come from him in the paint, but I don't think he should just be like a post up player or anything. I think he still needs to be on the perimeter a decent amount of the time. So Gunnar, what are your thoughts on
Mhm.
that one?
Yeah, I'd say fiction. A little bit of a trap question here, just trap statement, but I mentioned this, I think our last Bucks podcast, and it was that Celtics game we are talking about. I didn't get to fully say my thought because I blanked, but um, we we as fans, I think often we see, and I called Brook Lopez out saying that was probably a bad matchup against the Celtics for him, but I sometimes you need to look at it other way around is how do we take advantage of having Brook Lopez? Because they don't have size. So how do we use Brook Lopez to diminish at the fact that they have no size out there and really look at game 7 of 2022, which goes overlooked in my mind, which Brook had a really good first half in that game. I remember we just stopped going to him, but another game where we were in the game and because of Brook Lopez, because he was down low hitting the floaters. I'm not sure he cut much in that game, maybe a little bit. It wasn't like the Hawks series quite because really he was a focal point without Giannis in that series. He was like Nets Brook Lopez. And I would like to see him cut and stuff like that too. But like you mentioned, I just think we need to take advantage of him more in his size and things that we can do in the paint rather than just using him as a 3-point shooter out in the wing. But that is helpful to have a guy like that who just is always right there. Guys know where he is. People always talk about, as I talked about before I made the statement, is they say that he gets in Damian Lillard's way, but he helps Dame prefers him in the pick and roll, probably by far out of anybody on the team. And millions of times this season, Dame has kicked it out to Brook on the wing as he sits out by the hash mark and somehow makes a 3-pointer from that far away. So um, maybe he needs to have a little bit more limited minutes because I think is in the playoffs, that means like maybe 20 to 25. I'm not saying bench him, but we need to utilize his minutes a little bit better in that sense of when he's out there, let's attack him inside. And just use him a little bit more, I think, rather than just kind of get lost. And then now he's a big guy who's slow, and then you get a team who's playing small, and then now we're playing behind a little bit. I think there's this better way to use him going forward and in the playoffs. So the next one is something that we actually haven't talked about at all, really. Um, and I've noticed it throughout these games that when they post the records and stuff, but um, the Bucks currently hold a 18-19 road record, which would be our worst since the Jason Kidd, Joe Prunty season before the Bud era. So fact or fiction, the Bucks can win on the road in the playoffs.
fact. They can. Um, it's a concerning stat that they can't go on the road and win games. It's to me that stuff doesn't matter that much, and I think one games get officiated differently in the playoffs. Now that might make it. Who knows? Sometimes it's worse, and home court is even bigger in the playoffs. Sometimes in the regular season, I think refs just don't want to deal with the backlash during regular season games, so they are even more home happy during the regular season. And then in the playoffs, they know, okay, I gotta do my best to officiate this correctly. I mean, if you think back, the Bucks were able to go on the road during their finals run and win a bunch of games in the playoffs on the road. The Bucks also lost at home a few times on the playoffs, including like game one to the Hawks and stuff. Like it's, I don't think it's going to be a huge deal come playoff time because I do think that games are officiated differently once you get there, and I do think the Bucks have been pretty. I think that's a part of this issue is that on the road the Bucks have been officiated pretty poorly. Um, but also, I mean, I'm sure there's some regular season going on the road, staying out too late, doing stuff you probably aren't going to do on the road in the playoffs. I think that always plays a role in regular season record as well too. But I mean, you never know. Maybe it is a real sign. Maybe it's going to be an issue. But I I think if you can win at home, you can win on the road. I think if you're a good team, you're a good team. It just doesn't. It's not a great stat, but it also doesn't super concern me, I guess.
Hmm. And we have home court for the first two rounds at least, and then it would be the Celtics series if we don't, in the Eastern Conference Finals if they make it that far. So, it's 0-0 at that point, so it doesn't really matter. I do think we probably lacked a little toughness isn't necessarily the best word to use in the first half of the season, probably pre-Pat Bev era. But now that we've gotten Doc, and Pat Bev, that I just think we have a little bit more of a grittiness to us that I think we fight more in those games, and people will point to our overall record and say that that's not the case, whatever. But it feels like we have a little bit more fight than what we had in that first half of the year, where not we weren't trying to punt games, but we were just punting games, and letting teams get into our heads a lot, which I know that was a topic that we had probably back in December of against like the Pacers and whatnot, early January, earlier than that. A lot of that happened, and we felt like it was just a mental lapse, but I think we might have actually corrected that, hopefully. Um, in the playoffs is a whole different animal. So I don't think, and we've seen it even on the other end of the spectrum, that it does not matter who really has home court in the end. I would actually love to see a stat on that. Maybe someone has that of just in general, teams with home court, how much it actually affects you in the end. But um, yeah, I mean, if there's game seven, I'd rather have it go at home court. But at that point, then it's game seven. And usually anything happens at game seven. So
Yeah.
um,
I mean, the tough part with home court stuff is that most of the time, the team that has home court is the better team. So even stats based on record would be
yeah.
kind of iffy because it's usually the better team is just winning a lot of times. So
Hmm.
it's hard to say the real magnitude of how much home court actually helps.
All right. So number six in the Bud era, defense was sort of our calling. The Bucks always leaned on it. They were known for it around the league. People knew us as the defensive team, but obviously since acquiring Damian Lillard, it appears that our identity and really highlights on the word appears. Our identity is offense over defense. Um, so fact or fiction, offense over defense is the best pathway for the Bucks to win a championship this season.
Fiction. Um, I still do believe in the old saying that defense wins championships. The Bucks offense has to be better than it's been in the past because the defense is going to be worse. But I still think that playing good defense is the best way to go and win a championship, or playing competitive defense at least. Shooting in the playoffs does go down across the league. Like the Bucks aren't the only team that has people struggle more in the playoffs. There is something to the fact that they have to that players are more tense, that there's more high stakes shots at play, and guys do shoot worse. Like it just always happens. So leaning on offense can be a little bit dangerous because the offense comes and goes more than you would hope defense does. So I still think they have to lean on the defense, but that the offense should be better than it was in the past, while the defense might take a step back. I just think the general way that you have to lean is towards the defense still.
Mhm. And our defense has gotten a lot better since maybe
Yes.
people have, and they still label us as a really bad defensive team. At the very least, we're in the upper half of the league. I'm not saying we're perfect on defense either, but we're in a lot more of these games. And we've seen our offense even fall off a little bit towards this last couple of games, the last few weeks. Um, but yeah, I think it's the combination now of both because we've seen now we haven't had Damian Lillard, but we've had really top five, really good offenses in some of these Bud eras. And all of a sudden you show up to the playoffs and we're like, what happened to the offense? Why we can't make shots anymore? But that's playoff basketball, is that's not going to happen all the time. But having Damian Lillard, I think he's built more for a playoff offense where you can lean on him and work off of him. He can generate baskets in ways that we could not do that before. Um, but that's the offense side of it. Defense side is, I would say, what was the fiction then? Yeah, we did not lean. So I would lean defense. So I'd say fiction, because you need defense in the end. That's what's always going to be there. Um, and that's what's kept us in some of our runs that we've had in the past is defense in that 2022 series. Um, on paper, maybe we should have lost once Chris was down. We should have had zero chance in that Celtics series. But defense was the reason why we were able to stay in it. And then obviously defense was maybe the reason why we lost it. And then we had no offense. So then it was the combination at the end of it. But um, yeah, I think we just have a really good combination now going into the playoffs. Just going to see what it actually looks like. But I would lean defense for sure. You have to. Um, Number 7, fact or fiction. Favoring experienced players over youth is the correct way to win in the playoffs.
So I'd say fact. I think that probably it might surprise some people that I would say fact, but I do think that experience in the playoffs is extremely important. I also think that if there is a legitimately pretty big difference between two players and one is younger, you still have to play the younger player just because the other one might have more experience. Or even like, I guess really in that case, I'm talking Gallinari or AJ Green. Like that's really where I'm pointing this discussion towards. There's no way Ajax is playing in the playoffs barring injuries. Marjan might not play for the Bucks again at this point. I don't even know. He he is really getting pushed down the pecking order, it seems like. It's I don't like I said, I think it's more important to say like, okay, if there's a huge difference in talent and ability and like then you play whichever one is better. But if you're favoring two close players, then yes, I think you take the experience over the youth because they're going to be more likely to be able to stay calm, to be able to keep their wits about them when everything's going on during a playoff game. Um, so yeah, that's how I would answer that one.
Yeah, this was throwing Doc a bone, I guess. I texted you with I forgot who was playing, but you were like, why is he playing over AJ Green? And I was sent you like a gif of what Doc would say of like it's about the big picture because I know this is exactly what he's thinking of. He labeled Pat Connaughton when he was in his bad stretch when he first got here and said he's going to be important for us down the stretch. Um, he knows that Pat showed up big in probably the finals, and he knows that he was a big role and he's experienced, and he knows how to get done in those circumstances. So, um, much like really, it's nothing like it, but I guess in my head that's a weird way to think of it. But defense, you can lean on defense in the playoffs. I feel like you can lean on experienced guys in that way, like they just know how to get it done. And you can just lean on it, which again, I guess that makes no sense to defense, but my brain is like that. But um, I think that's what Doc's is doing is hoping that that's what will work in the long run. But you also have to play again, like you said, if AJ Green is very clearly playing better than name any one of the experience, even Jay Crowder, you can name too. If he's not playing well, that's a guy who's ready to step up and make shots and has proven that he can be impactful on defense in the very least, and bring energy. So I wouldn't mind trying it out in the first round or whatever, but getting AJ some looks and seeing how he handles it, that's probably the time to do it. But I also understand the route that Doc Rivers is taking. I just hope it works out, I guess, in the end. So I would say fact that you would play experienced guys over the youth is probably the best way to play in the playoffs. And the last one, fact or fiction. If the Bucks do not win the championship this season, the trade deadline will be the reason why.
Fiction. Adrian Griffin hiring will be the reason why if the Bucks do not win the championship this season. Or injuries or something. I mean, I don't know what happens, but they wasted half of the season on an incompetent coach who was putting them in a worse position to succeed than you could possibly put someone in. And people still keep bringing up the record and all that. I mean, the Bucks had the easiest schedule in basketball with one of the most talented teams in basketball. Of course, they won by putting up a bunch of points against those teams and not being able to guard anybody. Like, they didn't learn anything. In fact, they probably got into a bunch of bad habits under Griffin as well while they were winning these games. And Giannis talks about habits all the time. And I honestly think that was kind of the reason he was getting to his boiling point, was that he thought, you know, we're doing things wrong. We're winning games and it's making people think they're the right thing to do because we're winning games, but we're doing things wrong. And they wasted half a season of what could have been Dame and Giannis learning a two-man game, learning how to play together. And instead, they didn't work on it at all. They just told him, hey, just go run pick and rolls. Like, now Doc does this thing where they actually run them. Now they run a two-man game in practice, just them together working on different ways to do it, like handoffs. Swing it one way, then come around and get a handoff. Pass it to the other guy, pass it around, get it back, come around a screen. Like, there's way more than just going, Giannis, set a screen for Dame in a game, not working at it in practice at all. Just saying, hey, just go do that. Like, that's really oversimplifying things. And they wasted half the season not learning how to do any of this stuff. They wasted half the season having a bad defense and having to relearn defense. To me, if they don't win it, there's going to be multiple reasons they don't win a championship if they don't win it. But the main reason will always be the Griffin hiring to me, no matter what happens moving forward here.
Yeah, this is a very, very hard one. This is a good last one because I'll say fact, I think, actually. I lean more only because I think Doc has put us in a position where I feel like we have a chance, and much in the sense that like Mike Budenholzer gave us a chance. I think he sets the floor well, and now we have guys who can go out and make something happen. We could definitely win the championship this year, but I think where we went wrong was not getting, and maybe we didn't go wrong because no one wanted these guys because of how bad Bobby and Pat were playing. But I think not being able to get guys who could help in, I'm not saying we're going to waste a year if we don't win, but it does feel like with Dame's clock that we might have wasted a season. And saying, I've seen a lot of people saying, well, usually the second year is when stars really find their groove, where it's like true, but we don't have, I mean, we do have second, third, fourth years with Damian Lillard, but he's getting older. And you never know when your chances come around. So I just think we should have really attacked this season as the next 4 years as championship or bust. And that sucks. And I think now we even have a good mix of young guys too, where it doesn't necessarily have to feel like that. Maybe last year, something like that, even years before, it would have felt like, okay, we're going year by year here. And the turnover next year, who knows who's back on the team next year? I mean, Malik could be gone. And I mean, probably a trade happens at that point too with all of our assets, but we could have a lot different rotation next year even. So it's always going to turn over and everything. I just felt like this year, standing pat, agreeing with everything you just said, all we did was maybe give us back to the same chances that we had with Mike Budenholzer with a better roster. Could work out perfectly. I could definitely see us win a championship. Like I said, I just think that not getting those last couple pieces might have hurt us in the end, and maybe hurt our chances to win a championship. So I would say fiction.
Yeah, well, you'd say fact, but
Fact, I guess, yeah.
the thing for me is still one. I do think the Pat Bev upgrade over Payne has been pretty clear. I think he is a very legitimate upgrade. Helps the team a lot more than Cam Payne did. Yes, in an ideal world, we would have turned Pat Connaughton and Bobby into somebody who was a clear playoff player.
Mm-hmm.
I do think there's a pretty good chance Pat will be a fine playoff player this year. He has been shooting a lot better. The defense has been better under Doc. He clearly feels more comfortable in this system than he did in the other one. I still don't buy into Bobby being one, but he has also been better since the deadline. I do think there was just no market, though. And I think if there was a market at all for a clear upgrade, John Horst would have done it. I think maybe there was like some other flyers out there, somebody they could take a chance on. Like, hey, there's bigger ceiling here, but same floor or worse floor or whatever. But I do think now that I don't know if they are going to be able to combine the salaries at the draft or not, but they are going to be able to combine picks at the draft now.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that all kind of weighed in. And I would guess if there was a clear upgrade, he would have taken a trade, made a trade for one of them. But I think he also weighed the fact that, okay, there might be some interesting-ish moves here, but I don't buy that any of them are guaranteed to be better. And now I'll be able to at least combine these picks and whatever 13 million or whatever Bobby is, even if you can't combine both of their salaries and maybe make a legitimate upgrade trade this offseason. Like you said, I think this team is capable of winning a championship. And yes, it would have been fun to go all in. And I don't even disagree with you in terms of saying like the deadline still, I don't love the deadline still, but I do think in terms of the biggest reason, it's further down the list than I thought at the deadline, because I did think it was an issue at the deadline. I think it looks better now than it did a month and a half ago when it originally happened. So, but
Yeah,
I
I think
yeah,
I could see Pat. I could definitely see Pat Connaughton being a good playoff player. Maybe that was a good way not to trade him, but I just feel like Bobby is such be very lenient on my words here, but is important to the team and the fact that I think he's going to get minutes. And if you take his chunk out of the rotation, and then it's like, well, who do you go to next as far as size and guys who could switch and play with our lineup? It's going to be Brook or going really small with like Jay, like I wanted to see. But I just think that's such a big hole in our rotation that it's just like if we could have gotten a guy who does the things that he does, but maybe right and maybe not as talented, but he just does the right things and is solid. That would have went a long way for us. And maybe Bobby plays good in the playoffs and he does gives us the second half of 2021 playoffs because people will always forget what he did in the first half of those playoffs, and where he was barely playable. Not playable actually at times. He was barely playable, then he went to not playable, then he was forced to play, then he stepped up. So maybe he just needs a good opportunity like that and needs some confidence. But yeah, I just think his hole is so important to the team as far as the rotation goes that it's hard to replace now. I think hopefully Pat could step up or something like that. And Pat Bev for sure is was a big pickup and could definitely pay dividends in the end. So that was the end of that segment. Our last little bit of news here is wishing our good friend Brooke Lopez a happy birthday. So I don't have much to say. Actually, I don't know, but I hope he celebrates at Disney World at some point. I know that's always what he always cares about. So yeah, that's all I gotta say. Happy birthday to the big fellas. You got anything to say,
yeah.
Spencer?
I heard Robin Lopez also had a birthday on the same day. So happy
He
birthday to
is not
both of them.
employed by this team, so he cannot, unless he's NBA Paint, which there's been rumors going around that maybe he is, but and we collabed with them still, so who knows?
Yeah, he's a Bucks fan. Well, I'm counting him. No, but happy birthday, Brooke.
Yeah.
All right, we'll finish things off here with our random Bucks. So Gunner, what you got?
I picked Gary Payton, and I saw Ray Allen did an interview with JJ Redick. I keep name dropping JJ Redick's podcast in here so many times, but um, then I thought of the reverse of that, and we got Gary Payton, and I don't remember really much of anything, and I just ever since then now he was a really good player, obviously at the glove, and had great memories before us, but that was before he was old and we got him for our franchise player who that's all we got for him and Desmond Mason, the Cowboy. So I have really bad memories as far as just what's been implanted into my head when I hear his name because that's not happy memories because I wanted Ray Allen to stay in the Bucks. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I think we had a first round exit with him. I think we made the playoffs maybe that year that he stayed. Then he went to the Lakers afterwards and maybe won a championship or something. But not my favorite trade in Bucks history, maybe my least favorite, but yeah.
Yeah, luckily we were young enough where we kind of remember it happening, but it also wasn't quite the same
Yeah.
type of hurt we would have had later in our lives. But I know so many people who will tell me that like I stopped being a Bucks fan when that trade happened. Like people genuinely stopped until Giannis came around because of that trade. And yeah, for me, it's more I can use Gary Payton in my theme teams for 2K my team. So I mean, it's a nice card to be able to add to my lineup. The dude can
True.
defend. And he's got a nice jumper in 2K, so I enjoy using him in that. And I get to use Ray Allen still, so I mean I get best of both worlds. Um, my pick is not somebody that I have had access to in 2K my team for quite some time, and that is Chris Douglas Roberts. Um, it turns out he only played 44 games for the Bucks. I have very vivid memories of those games apparently, but I loved him in college at Memphis. So I was super excited when we got Chris Douglas Roberts from, I don't remember if he was cut by the net. No, he was probably part of the
I think he
Yee
was
trade. Now that
traded.
I'm looking at the timeline, he was probably part of the Yee trade or something. But
Yeah.
um, he, when he was at Memphis, I was just a very big fan of his, and I believe it was the '08 team, which means he played with
He had a
he
good
played
year. I
with D
remember it.
Rose. Huh?
He had a good year with us. I remember for sure he played well.
Yeah, he did fine for us. Yeah, he played with D Rose in '08. He was part of that team that was in the national championship. Um, yeah, what did he do with us? He had 20 minutes a game, 7.3 points. He was 33% from three, 43% overall, a couple of rebounds, assist. He was fine. He was definitely okay. He I do want to find out though how we got him. I'm gonna start looking for that, but I think it was part of that trade. I have to imagine it was. Either way, I was just a big fan of him in college. So when we did get him, I was pretty pumped. Um, oh no, it was just a second round pick, 2012
Yeah.
second round pick we traded to get him, and that ended up being Robert Sacre, which I remember very vividly as well. Now I'm going to go down a rabbit hole, but he was I remember him. He was just a bald dude who always annoyed me on the Lakers. But um, anyway, I'm rambling
The
about
Chris
Chris Douglas.
Douglas Roberts trade tree.
Yeah, no, that's the end of it. That was the whole thing. But they probably he actually probably played with Sacre on the Lakers for a training camp because he was with the Lakers in training camp that same year.
Wow.
Super important that we talk about that stuff. But no, I do remember him as a Buck, and I honestly thought he was there for longer or played more games or something. I remember him pretty vividly. He played like 40 games. But Chris Douglas Roberts, college legend, Derrick Rose teammate, probably the best player to come out of that class of Memphis's players. I mean, sure, won an MVP, but Derrick Rose hasn't played for the Bucks, so Chris Douglas Roberts did, so he's the
True.
best. Um, that's
Chills.
yeah, that's all I got on CDR. Probably more than anyone wanted to know. If you are still listening and didn't tune me out for that whole spiel, please like and subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on. Remember to follow us on Twitter at the Cream City Pod. Please feel free to leave feedback for us on how we can get better. Thank you all for listening, and we will see you next time.
Go Bucks.